What if every day was quiet?
What if your world was dark?
Would you give up? Helen didn't.
Helen Keller dedicated her life to helping and doing good things for others. She was always doing something to raise awareness for the blind and deaf community. She did all she could to promote and get equal treatment for those who couldn't get help on their own. Helen Adams Keller was born on June 27, 1880. When she was born, she had all of her senses. She lost them when she became very sick and had a very high temperature. Her parents are Arthur H. Keller, the conductor of the Army, and Kate Adams Keller, a hard-working housewife. Both of her parents managed their family farm. Helen was born in a house called Ivy Green in Tuscumbia, Alabama. She became blind, deaf, and mute when she was 19 months old. When Helen was growing up, her life was filled with tantrums and fights because she was unable to communicate with others, and that was her only way of getting what she wanted or needed. She was very stubborn and strong-willed. She wanted to do things her way. For example, eating with her hands instead of using a spoon. Kate Keller had a teacher for Helen. Her name was Anne Sullivan. This woman would not only be Helen's teacher, but a lifelong companion. I once said, I would rather walk with a friend in the dark than alone in the light.
And she meant it.
Anne was a teacher from the Perkins Institute for the Blind, who also suffered from a childhood of loss and failing eyesight. Anne was determined to transform Helen from a wild animal to a gentle young girl, and she knew language was key to opening up Helen's mind.
It started with trying to connect DOLL to a real word like dog. At first, Helen didn't understand. That frustrated both of the girls. Anne worked with Helen every day to help her understand. It wasn't too long before Helen knew everything had a name and everything meant something. She would touch everything and beg to know its name. Helen described April 5th, 1887 as the most important day of her life.
Recreated in the scene of The Miracle Worker, an Oscar-winning movie in a 3-act play based on her life. On April 5th, Helen recognized the word water. From then on, Helen had a passion for language. The process of learning how to speak was explained by Anne and Helen on the newsreel footage in 1930. Helen was highly intelligent, and she learned how to read and write in several different languages.
The highest result of education is tolerance, Helen said.
Helen got into Radcliffe University and graduated in 1904. She used her language skills to write 12 books in her lifetime. Helen tried and succeeded to raise money and awareness for the blind-deaf community. She used the money that she earned from the books she wrote and the money from her movies and donated it to schools and foundations. Helen even rejected getting more money for herself and insisted on it being donated as well. In 1924, she joined the American Foundation for the Blind, which is the nation's leading advocate for the blind and visually impaired. Helen was an ambassador for the AFB for 44 years. Before Helen, children with mental or physical disabilities were sent to insane asylums, and some children believed growing up like this was normal. Back then, people did not know what to do with them and usually sent them to poorhouses, insane asylums, and mental hospitals. Helen was determined to change that. Anne herself had been sent to a poorhouse in Tuscaloosa with her brother that had been born with disfigured hips. Because of Helen and other people after her, disabled children can now live the lives they deserve instead of going to a scary place just because of a sickness or a birth defect. To make this change, Helen made numerous pleas for the blind, deaf, and mute people to have more opportunities to live a normal life like the people who can see, hear, and talk. Help me hasten the day when there shall be no preventable blindness, Helen pled. She traveled to over 30 countries to help people who were disabled and treated unfairly, and was offered thousands of dollars to help her cause. She toured the world requesting that books be available in Braille writing. It's almost unbearable to imagine people being treated poorly only because they are blind or deaf. Think of how people would be treated if Helen had not raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to help the blind people. People with disabilities were considered useless in the 1880s because they couldn't help earn money to pay for necessities, like food. Nobody showed they cared for the disabled. They were not allowed to get help, because that was asking for a handout. People would have an attitude towards disabled people, usually resulting in verbal and physical abuse. Disabled people were avoided by able-bodied people. That stuff doesn't happen anymore. Disabled people get help, even if they don't ask for it. They are no longer abused because they're different. This is all because of Helen, and people like her who wanted a change. People who worked hard to make things change. People like Helen Keller. Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much, Helen told her friends. The disabled can now have the proper education and sometimes the medical treatment to help them have more freedom. Helen went back to her home in Westport, Connecticut after Anne had died. She herself died in her sleep on June 1st, 1968. Helen was a remarkable role model and an ambassador for the disabled. It's amazing that she could do so much being disabled herself. But her legacy lives on and still to this day changes people's lives. Her message to the world was see with your heart, not your eyes.